mind if we ask your judging experience and preference?
Can we start?
We all go to the University of the Pacific in our own parlay team.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we've done Parlay Bay for like 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
We're nationally competitive.
We do debate.
That's debatable.
So to provide an order before I begin, I'm going to look over the definition and definitions regarding the resolution, valid criterion, inherency, and then onto the plan and then advantages of our stance. So just for just brief off-time welcome, I'd like to thank everybody for coming, both my opponents, congratulations for making it this far. Awesome, I'm looking forward to a great round. Thank you all the judges and of course all the spectators. If I could just ask that we keep it respectful and just not talk a whole lot, if you could avoid talking at all, that would be great, just so my partner and I, and of course my opponents and judges can all focus on the round. So with that, I will be starting my time now. Like I said, everybody welcome, thank you for coming. So just starting right at the top about with the resolution, and that reads today that the United Nations Security Council should establish a treaty to protect and preserve extraterrestrial microbial life in ecosystems. So like I said, for definitions, an ecosystem is a community of living organisms in conjunction with the non-living compounds of their environment. So something like a forest or a tundra. So those are all different kinds of ecosystems. So also extraterrestrial just means outside the earth, so we're looking in space. And microbial means having to do with microorganisms. It's a very small type of life. But as I'll get into, very key and important to protect and preserve. So onto net benefits, we have two sort of. So value criterion is net benefits. Essentially, whichever team can provide more benefits by either putting into effect our plan, which the affirmation will give, or if they provide a counter plan or run the status quo. So whoever can provide more net benefits to humans, because the United Nations, as they're the actor of this plan, we have to understand that their sole mission is really looking out for the human race and humans in general and people on Earth. So that is our first. But our second value criterion is then going to be to other life forms. But we're holding humans above the other life in looking at our net benefits. Yes?
Wait, so are you saying that the only two strategies that we can take are counter plan and status quo?
Whichever case you wish to run, you have to prove that we can benefit humans. Okay, so moving on into what the inherency is today. And I'm sure as all of you guys know, read the news and focus on current events, we are on the verge of discovering life. Any day now, our spaceships and our space shuttles that are going out to extraterrestrial bodies such as asteroids or planets, or even our moon could discover life. And that could really be in the form of microbial life forms. So we have evidence of this. So on July 6th of 2015, some top astronomers have found that a comet home to the Philae lander could have microbial life under its surface. So the comet name is 67P, and essentially the European Space Agency's Rosetta craft detected evidence of viral particles. So we see we're really on the verge of this discovery. Additionally, in 2011, we saw there was fossil evidence for cyanobacteria of carbonaceous meteorites, and Richard Hoover from the French Orgueil meteorite discovered this. So we see is we're on the verge, and that's why it's important that we enact a plan now to prepare for the future, because we're on the verge of it, and we can't do that once we've already started discovering them. We have to start protecting and preserving now and have that ready and in place. And with that, I will get right into the affirmations plan for today. So we have 2 points on our plan. The first of which is that all spacecraft that are to land on any extraterrestrial body must be sterilized properly and efficiently. So the first point on this is that we're going to use dry heat microbial decontamination. And second, we're going to use ionized gases. So these are really the top level, what people who focus on space study and exploration, these are the top 2 ways of sterilizing the spaceship properly. And our second point on our plan is that if life is found, we take the entire asteroid or 1,000 miles squared cubic miles of that planet become a nature preserve. And essentially only UN sanctioned missions, so sanctioned by the General Assembly, with the United Nations observers, can study any life or microbial life that is found on this planet or asteroid, and they can't bring this species back to Earth. So with that, I will get into the advantages of our plan today. The very first of which is preserving life. So it's really important that we're preserving microbial life because we don't want to accidentally destroy it, especially before we even understand it or how it responds to its ecosystem and how it interacts with the ecosystem of the given planet or asteroid. So as we all know, some bacteria we have could potentially wipe it out. We don't really know what's on our spaceship, and that's why the very first part of our plan is incredibly key in protecting and preserving microbial life. And that's really how the affirmation today is upholding the resolution. So we really have to properly sanitize our ships before we go in and accidentally destroy life before we know how it works. And this is important because a singular microbe may not seem important, but it is potentially connected to that entire planet's ecosystem extensively. And destroying that could potentially destroy other life that we haven't even discovered yet on that planet as well as a whole. And we really have the result of ruining an entire global ecosystem. Potentially that one microbe could be responsible for producing the gases that make up the atmosphere of that planet or asteroid. So what we're really seeing is it's important that we're preserving this. Additionally, it can be a keystone species, essentially a species that has a huge effect on any other species in the area. So we don't want to go in there and destroy any ecosystems by just messing up this one small microbe. So what we're seeing from this is if we don't act our plan, we can potentially destroy the ecosystem of an entire planet. But furthermore, we're really losing out on the knowledge we could gain. And that's really going on into my second contention today, which is the research opportunities and the benefits we can claim from researching these things. So new things are learned by going into space. I think we can all agree on that. We saw the discovery of liquid helium and helium-3 on the moon, for example. Now we're learning that they could potentially have the power to power cars without releasing greenhouse emissions. And that is a huge benefit to life, to everybody on Earth. And that is our first value criterion, which is net benefits to humans. We're able to discover how to use things that we find in space to benefit us on Earth. As you know, we have this huge global warming problem right now. Our planet's not doing so well. But what we're discovering in space has the potential to fix that. And it has the potential to really help us maintain our planet. And this is a huge benefit to people if we're preserving our planet, the thing that really provides life for us and everything we need for our existence. But moving on, if we go in and we destroy any species, before we fully understand its function, we have a chance to study it and research it and use it for our own benefits, we can't claim any access to those benefits. So if my opponents come in here and run that we don't need this treaty, we do. We need a treaty that says we are protecting these things before we actually discover them. And so we really want to be able to claim any of these benefits to humankind. And with that, I'll move on into my third contention, which is about precaution. So as I already said in my first contention, we could accidentally destroy microbes of another planet without meaning to, based on some bacteria or virus that we have that's carried on our own spaceships. So we have to take the precautions not to destroy them, but it goes vice versa as well. We don't want to accidentally let them harm us, getting a spore on a space shuttle or some small microbe that can end up causing huge detriments to life on Earth if we bring it back. And that's why the second part of our plan is so key. We're not going to just bring this back to Earth without really understanding it, because the problem is this could really has a huge potential to harm humans. As we saw things like bringing smallpox to the Americas really harmed Native Americans and killed off many of them. And the same thing happened with the Spanish flu in 1918 before we had penicillin. It killed up to 50 million people. So we really have to understand that taking these precautions to preserve humankind and really access these benefits is the best way to go in today's resolution. And that's why I humbly ask for an affirmation ballot. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm just going to be going one on, then into the case. You might need, you'll probably need 5, or if you're typing it, but if you're writing, you'll probably need about 5. Alright, so start time now. Framework, interpretation, evaluate the debate as a dialectic material. So we're destroying inquiry to the determinate factors into the PMC. The role of Alice endorses historical outlook of the topic with the most explanatory power. The role of Alice to endorse the historical outlook of the topic with the most explanatory power. 1. Particular facts are irrelevant without totalizing historical view. Affix universal is particular to capitalism. Methodological inquiry is prior to action. Focus on method is key to practice. Otherwise, ideology and implementation will fail. 2. Inconsistencies insistence on locating all political discussion within the state is used to destroy class consciousness. Policies are based on what rich people want, not what is best. 3. Debate is the critical side of resistance. The way we frame the debate over capitalism is the way we determine capitalism's strength over us. We must set limits to capitalism's strength in all spheres of life. 4. We must start from the perspective of capitalism to actually destroy capitalism. Thesis. Marx's labor theory of value is best. Thesis. Marx's labor theory of value is best. 1. Primacy. Life is determined by wealth at birth. Stories of consciousness, states of consciousness intelligible only through their prior causes. The app is futile without prior theorization of social totality because it overlooks systemic necessity and their impact.
I cannot understand what you are saying, and so you're decreasing the educational value of this debate by making the affirmations unable to respond.
If I'm speaking too fast, then you should shout clear or slow. I don't know if you cannot speak if I'm speaking too fast.
Clear, slow.
2. Universality. Totalizing theory is most productive. Allows for inclusive coalition building to resist structures of power. Recognizing the way material inequalities and other forms of oppression create a method that doesn't exclude views subject to intersecting forms of study. Intersecting forms of structural violence. And consists of forms of systemic oppression, generate social ruptures necessary to understand other forms. 3. Ideology. Capital creates epistemic blind spots. Only dialectic critique allows for objective production of knowledge. Thus, and that's a DA to the firm. Okay. So now on to links. So the first link is the advocacy of state action gives the appearance that this is a democratic participation, when in reality is a way to reify the established order. They try to find a way. Performance finds a way to equal their advocacy for limited change, and basically the rich will only try to do limited change to have the established order, and this inevitably will lead to class exploitation. The app participates in a way to come to a consensus by which this violence become naturalized. 2. Reforms lead to compromise and are basically an exploitation and are a way of creating profit, which obscures capitalism's role in representation of social relations, which turns the case because the same errors will only be made in new and worse ways. 3. Link number 3. Their action in space posits space as a resource to be exploited, which is an inherently capitalistic mindset. They're looking to these microbes and they're looking to space as a way to find study sport, which inherently would fund and basically help all the rich people and help them make profit out of it. 4. The United Nations is nothing more than a posit for the United States to expand its hegemony. The Security Council is a way for the United States and all those 4 other superpowers to exert their influence over all other nations. This exertion of hegemony will inevitably lead to the United States using its hegemonic influence to advance the needs of the rich in those other 188 countries, which will inevitably lead to basically capitalism's role expanding all throughout the world. So D are the impacts. 1. Capitalism fuels an imperial drive to find new sources of expansion, which necessitates structural crisis and massive warfighting that ends in extinction. That ends in extinction. Our second impact is it turns their case. The impact capitalist entirely misrepresents how state capitalism makes decisions. The ruling class is well aware of the PMC's impacts, but because capitalism places a premium on short-term greed, it will continue to recklessly promote its interests anyways. The impacts are exactly why we need to challenge the system. 4. Capitalism creates material inequalities that exacerbate all forms of oppression, such as racism and sexism. And our fourth impact, is environment. Essentially, capitalism creates this need for profit, which will inevitably lead corporations to go out into the environment and exploit the earth to find the profit that they need so much. In the past 100 years, global warming, like my opponents mentioned, has occurred and has occurred massively simply because of capitalism. Vast swaths of the Amazon, vast swaths of the American American forests and heartland has been destroyed because of capitalism's expansion greed. This will inevitably lead to extinction of not only human life, but also all life on Earth. So the alternative, vote neg to endorse Marxist labor theory of values. The alternative, vote neg to endorse Marxist theory of values. 1. Revolutionary theory is a priori question. Without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. Activating the stance by using the resolution as a site to interrogate class politics creates valuable knowledge. 2. Voting neg acts upon the ethical necessity of criticism by bringing to the fore practices of violence which we are complicit with. We should reject their move of affirmation to best confront the failings of the reformist politics and the violent context of the PMC. A, condemnation is key. The apolitics of positive action against the structural forces of oppression disavows critical relations of power, which constitutes complicity and ethical irresponsibility. B, our ethical act of condemnation calls class hierarchy into question and redeploys caste universality to open up space for investigation and critique. 3, the all-praise enmity versus capital, which is key to the revolutionary politics, using your ballot to mark I don't have time. To mark the crude points of the PMC epistemology. A, anti-capitalist method is key. If we win, the social antagonists are rooted in material inequalities, then vote. B, because capitalism determines dollars through intellectual hegemony, our responsibility isn't to formulate a specific alt, but to produce the conditions necessary for such an alt to emerge. Failure to reject capitalism through totally naturalizes specific sites of oppression like the state and student government systems. Solvency 1, debate is critical side persistent. The way we frame and design our educational debates over capitalism will determine the strength of capitalism over all of us. Behind the state apparatus, the educational apparatus which has replaced the previously dominant church as contributing to the learning, normalized reproduction of capitalist relations, exploitation, and education. Exploitation. Education takes years in which we are most vulnerable and it's protected time, and drums into us the ruling ideology. It is by this apprenticeship that the ideology of the ruling class and capitalist social formations are incalculated and reproduced. We must use this as a point of departure to criticize the strategy of the bourgeoisie and foster the revolution. 2, spread of anti-capitalist consciousness is critical to fostering the revolution. This means that leading the masses of people and fighting against the outrages and injustices of the system, and to do this in a way that prepares for the great revolution ahead. It must enable growing numbers of people to see the necessity of the historical mission of communism to embrace the universalism of solidarity of class consciousness. Now on to Case, just addressing their plan and a few quick solvency points. First, their entire point about how they're going to feed the spacecraft is completely non-unique. All major powers that already launch space missions already do this. The United States, Russia, India, China, all of them already do this. That makes their entire plan non-unique. First of all, they said they're going to find life. First of all, we've never found life, even though we've been searching for hundreds of thousands of years. Those hundreds of years, yeah, long time. Most scientists agree that there's probably no life in the solar system. The next closest solar system is light years away, meaning it would take humans literally millions of years to come. It's protected time. So for all those reasons and more, I strongly urge an acknowledge. Thank you.
Alrighty. I'm ready. Okay, so my order is this. My order is going to be disorganized in this speech. And it is going to be disorganized for reasons I'm going to address in this speech, reasons why ultimately you should vote in the affirmation. More specifically, I'm going to try to make some general points about the critique that they have made, then go on to specifically address line by line the critique they have made, and finally talk about the affirmation case. Great, is everyone ready? Okay, my first observation. I asked them to slow down and to speak in the words that I understood, because but yet, they completely ignored what I said and continued pretty quickly to speed up almost immediately after I finished. And what this means is that I fundamentally missed almost half of their case. The truth is, I'm pretty good at flowing. I've been debating for 4 years, and yet I fundamentally cannot keep up with the negation team. So the ultimate truth is, by running an argument that the affirmation, cannot go up against, and I apologize, this is my flow. I'm doing my best here. I apologize for that, that's me, but the fundamental fact is, even because of that, their knowledge that I cannot keep up with them, and they're running this case anyway, in a way to make me not be able to keep up with them, decreases the educational value of today's debate, because if there is no debate on the issue, then it's not logical, and there's no argument. I'll get to your POI in a second. And so there's no education, and in fact, this debate is seen as more of a farce, and the very points it is advancing are set back. And additionally, that's not to mention, that is of course unfair, and that I think is an even more a priori issue than whether or not this debate happens at all, is the fairness. Because the impacts of that go to only real world impacts in this round. Because if debate is seen as unfair, especially in a round that is recorded, then more and more people will choose not to go into parliamentary debate and lose all the educational benefits of parliamentary debate. And that is perhaps the most legitimate real world impact and the most powerful one we should consider. I'll take your POI.
What's the bright line to speaking fast? How do I know my speaking fast is
Alright, so let me tell you, what you just did in that last speech was speaking too fast. What I'm doing right now is not speaking too fast. If you're in an okay place, that's great, and that's wonderful, but I think we can all agree we're going pretty fast. Let me move on. So, some general points on their critique. Now, I have a couple things. What they're doing basically is rejecting the resolutions here. And so my first point on the critique is that critiques are based on the logical fallacy of a false dichotomy. They claim we can't debate without questioning these underlying assumptions, but ultimately that's demonstratively untrue because we could totally have a debate here. And let's face it, most of the people in this audience are not going to immediately go from assuming that we're talking about the UN to believing that therefore Marxist theory is not legitimate. So therefore, there's no reason for them to do this. And additionally, that way of thinking leads to infinitely regressive argumentation, decreasing the value of the debate by directing conversation away from relevant information to our own lives, and then instead onto other stuff. Judges, we have limited time. We should focus on things that are more relevant to our lives because they have more real-world educational value. My second general point on the critique is pragmatism, namely that action in the real world should always be favored over idealism. Because the likelihood of us debating being beneficial to our education, especially us debating in a way where both sides can compete fairly, is a value that is way, way, way higher than going on to all other stuff. Plus, let's be real, this critique made Act 1 completely irrelevant, is wasting my partner's time. She could have spent that time getting a latte if they just let us know they were going to run a critique. And then honestly, we would all be better off. I think the impact of a latte might actually be the biggest impact of today's round, given how spacey everything else has become. So again, we should value pragmatism because it's more focused on real impacts. Number 3 is critique skew prep time because we have no possibility of anticipating their case. Again, we lose educational value overall. And finally, just on comprehensibility, our points have gone quite deep into Marxist dialects. Let me just tell you, my mother has a degree in Marxist economic theory from Budapest Karl Marx University, and she has taught me about this for 12 years, and I didn't understand the critique, and there's no reasonable way I could understand the critique. And so ultimately, I'm going to do my best, but you should way farther towards the affirmation in today's debate, because they run arguments that most human beings fundamentally cannot refute, and therefore decrease the educational value of the debate. Let's move on to specifically talking the critique. So, actually, first a general point on the entire critique. Their critique, what it does, is it makes communism look kind of silly. Because they're clearly not being sincere here, what they're doing is using this attempt to win a debate in a nearly incomprehensible form, give me a second, when the only word that many lay people will understand from their critique is the word communism. What most people think from this is not, oh, communism is legit. What they think from this debate is, wow, communism is a word that's going really fast from something that looks like they're just trying to win today's debate. Now, they may or may not just be trying to win today's debate. I can't speak to what's in their brain, but it actually devalues this idea. So even if you believe that this idea is a good idea, they're actually making it less likely to be happening, and so I'm going to turn their entire case there. Now let's move on to some specifics. As I said, I couldn't flow their speech, so the signposting will be messy here. I'm going to do my best. Number 1, let me just tell you, they talk about capitalism being the thing we should fight it. Well, capitalism is inherent to human beings. Basic ideas, such as desire for greed, are emotions built into our genetics and DNA. Therefore, any attempt to ultimately abolish capitalism is a waste of resources that diverts our efforts from making capitalism better and solving the harms that it does. In fact, so therefore, they're doing net harms. Again, moving on from that, now they talk about that we're debating essentially from the perspective of capitalism here. I would disagree. The United Nations Security Council is not from the perspective of capitalism because for a long time it had multiple communist countries on that Security Council. For them saying the Security Council is a tool of capitalism is absurd. It is a tool of some countries, but not all of them. Now let's move on a little bit more. They did a lot of stuff, but then most of the other points when they made about, I really simply wrote down blind spot and university here. The thing is, on a lot of these points, they really have no reasoning. They say that capitalism encourages environmental harms and just moved on. So there's no really a general critique on 4 or 5 of their points and say that they're just stating things, assuming we can go fast enough. Most of them are completely unsubstantiated and should not be flowed. Now let's move on to this idea that the UN creates hegemony. The UN does not create hegemony. The truth is, what the UN does is makes it so all superpowers are willing to come together into one international body. If there was no Security Council, the superpowers still have veto power, they would create their own independent Security Councils. There would be no cooperation in a general action. The UN does not enforce hegemony because superpowers veto each other. If anything, Security Council is a depressive force, makes the UN do less. But if we didn't have that, there would be multiple competing organizations, and the unique benefit of a single international organization, people doing things like this plan would be lost. So in fact, this is completely false to say that. And in fact, otherwise, there would be more hegemony. Now let's move even farther on that. So then they talk about how capitalism leads to war and extinction. Again, they just kind of said this without reasoning, and if they just start coming and explaining this later, that's rather abusive. But let me explain. Capitalism hasn't led to war and extinction. In fact, capitalism is focused on maintaining benefits to average people over ideology, which communism more often favors, makes it actually less likely because there's more focused on rational action. And ultimately, communism leads to more inequality, not less. Because in communism, you have the very, very few people with political power control a system where everybody else is on the same level. So it's even a higher Gini coefficient. Soviet Union had a higher Gini coefficient than the United States did. So let's move on to the affirmations case. to the extent that they have to. Now, they ran solvency attacks on our plan. First of all, they say all space organizations do this. That's not actually true. The second thing we talk about ionization is a new technique that most space organizations haven't done. It is somewhat expensive, so that's the reason why they don't do it, but we've shown you why it's actually important. Secondly, they say we haven't found life. That's just wrong. My partner showed you why we found life and explained it in great detail that we're very, very close to it. In fact, several instances of almost getting there. Therefore, by precautionary principle, we should take this plan right away. And then I'm going to do another 20 seconds of overtime because he went 20 seconds overtime, just to say, kind of calmly, if they start going fast again, or if they start saying things, not that you guys understand, because I know you guys are better debaters than we are, and you all understand everything I'm saying, but if the majority of the people in this room don't understand what the negations case is moving on, then you guys shouldn't vote for them, because ultimately the educational value is being decreased. And that's why I just humbly vote in the affirmation. Thank you.
Alright, so as a brief off-time roadmap, we're going to first be going over the T, reasons why K's are bad. We'll be going over the K part by part, lane by lane, going down our opponent's points. You can just concede all the reputations and solvency, that's fine. Alright, so now let's begin on essentially what our opponent K is, this general broad overview of how K's are bad. You can treat that as the T in today's space. They never actually gave you a full topicality shell. Their first response here, since they never actually gave you a full T shell, there's no reason to actually vote on that. Insofar as it never provides you voters, standards, or even saying that it's truly a priori, you have no reason to refer that to you in today's debate. But even if you don't buy that, let's go down this sort of line by line the way that they presented it to you. Now, first thing that they say is that they essentially missed half the case because my partner didn't slow down. Judge, after they asked my partner to slow down, he spent almost the entirety of the debate talking like this. If that wasn't slow enough, they could have simply asked him to slow down once more, and he would have been more than willing to do so. So first off, at that point, we had no means whatsoever decrease the educational value in today's debate because we were very willing to pursue their demands. Now, the second reason here why we weren't so-called abusing their education is that if they had only asked for our flow, we would have very happily given every single sheet to them. They could have copied it down after we gave it if they didn't understand what we said. So that's the second reason why we don't have abuse. But now the third reason, I'll take your PL later by time, that we don't have abuse, that they claim to say that we sort of present our K in this really incomprehensible manner. Judge, our opponents have beautiful, beautiful diction and vocabulary. Their way of phrasing is brilliant. They're obviously very brilliant people. We by no means whatsoever use diction that was more incomprehensible than theirs. So insofar as that's true, what you essentially see here is that one, we slowed down. We could have gone even slower if they wanted us to. As you're seeing, we're talking slowly right now. Second point is essentially saying that we would have happily given them the K file by file, piece by piece. And then our third point here is that obviously our diction was by no means incomprehensible as they have used exactly better diction. I was going to your opponent's next point here, how we decrease the education value in today's debate. Judge, by no means whatsoever are we decreasing education by encouraging our opponents to look at a worldview different from their own. Go to the entire framework, go to the thesis, and go to every single subpoint on our framework. We clearly tell you here that debate is a critical site of resistance. Only by considering a new dialectical perspective can we truly advance education. As you can clearly see, as our opponents have conceded, we're the only team here that's advancing education both under the framework and under the rules of debate itself. Now let's go on last point, last to our opponent's point, your POI.
How can you argue that you're furthering the educationality of today's debate by completely disregarding the topic and then in your second speech completely dropping anything you actually said on the case we're debating today?
Alright, so let's talk about how we're furthering the education in today's debate. Judge, we cannot debate a topic insofar as our understanding and our mindset of it is flawed. So long as you have a flawed perception of the world, no matter what kind of topic you debate, if you don't criticize and examine your own perceptions, assumptions, and outview on the world, any policies and actions you make will always be fatal fatally and terminally flawed, as you can see once again in our framework, and therefore will be doomed to failure. There is no education from a policy doomed to failure. You don't need any education, that's especially not unfair. Last to say here that it's unfair. Once again, we've shown you many times how it's not unfair, as far as they don't prove how it actually decreases education, and so on. There are people who are actually learning, as you can see, they most definitely are. We're by no means unfair. Now let's go on to this point about how they talk about how Ks are essentially bad. First off, there's a false dichotomy, so there's no reason to talk about it. Once again, as we told you before, if we have a limited time, look towards our framework, look towards a thesis, we have to look towards the most education first. Any policy based on flawed minds will always be terminally flawed insofar as that's true. So given more educational mindset, we obviously win on that. There's by no means any reason not to get today's K. Let's go to our second point. How once again there's an education value for failure, how we're wasting it from the time judge. We're by no means wasting the ass time. What a K basically is just a framework shell on top of links, on top of impacts, on top of a counter plan. You can break that down simple as any other thing in debate, any other technique, and answer it just as easily. A K is by no means as intimidating model that they make it out to be. They could have very easily answered and still gain education value in today's debate. We're by no means wasting time. Once again, we're increasing education. Let's go to one of the last point, how we essentially use our prep time so that decreases education value overall. And once again, you can extend our arguments around our entire framework, how this mindset comes first. And our second response there is also going to be, insofar as we have to realize that NAG doesn't really have much advantage in today's debate. We have to always anticipate any possible counterpoint. So we in fact also have a prep speed. If you're going to look towards prep, that's a complete wash of an argument anyways. Now let's go down to the K. Alright, so going on to framework. Our opponents basically say that we're making communism look bad. Now our first response here is that is an act of rhetorical violence. And our opponents are essentially telling us and trying to say that our mindset is a flaw and they are accusing us of when we stand up here and show you our beliefs, so a rhetorical act, they are accusing us of lying, and that is clearly an act of violence and intimidation against us. We have to listen to rhetorical violence at the moment you accuse someone of telling a lie, they're expressing their beliefs, you decrease freedom of expression, you decrease communication, insofar as that's you're going to decrease any check against the rights, abuses, and oppression of the entire world. Our second response here is that they say we're basically making communism less likely to be passed because we're talking about communism in a way that looks like we're devaluing it. Now the first thing we have to do is, once again, so the role of the ballot here is to advocate for the best historical dialectical mindset. What you're doing here is that because we're giving you a perspective, so we're having two competing alternatives, if you give us a ballot, then what we're doing here is we are essentially advancing communism. Insofar as that's true, they basically have no basis whatsoever for that point. You can cross-apply every single point under agreement. You can cross-apply role of the ballot, cross-apply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, cross-apply thesis. And so now let's go on to our thesis. They've essentially this completely unresponded. Insofar as that's true, we have to realize that capitalism is always going to be subject to an epistemological blind spot. Our opponents can see that what that means that any policy they pass is always going to have terminal policy failure. Even a post-fiat level, you can't look at them because once again, they link directly into the impacts of today's debate because all the impacts are a direct DA to their plan. Now let's go on to links. I'm sorry, I don't have time. Now, since our opponents leave all of our links unresponded except for one. It says that the UN isn't a measure of gender. You know, we have to listen to today's debate. So the UN is the biggest hegemonic body in today's entire international community. It is ruled almost completely by the US and other Western nations. They have a disproportionate share of influence insofar as that's what we see here. So these capitalist nations are clearly advancing their agendas through a blatantly skewed form. So we can extend all of our links so they fail to respond to that one. Yes.
Extend each and link individually.
We don't have time for that, but if you look down your flow, there's 5 of them. Now let's go into impacts. Basically, our opponents drop all frameworks except they say that capitalism doesn't lead to war. You drop away every other impact except across the globe. Now, instead, capitalism basically isn't the war. What we empirically show is that right now in the status quo, we think does the wars around the entire world solely due to cap. So to the extent that our opponents fail to explain the fact that we give the exact empirics. Second, instead of communism is going to cause war and that's Stalinism, not Marxism. You can just drop that. Sure, that's Stalinism, not Marxism, doesn't apply. What we're just advocating here is by no means that. Alright, so you can send all impacts across the world. That's clearly a direct DA to our opponent's plan. They have been subject to just terminal policy failure. Now let's go on to the all-in-all solvency. Judge, our opponents leave the all-in-all solvency completely unresponded. Insofar as that's true, the all in today's debate is directly our advocacy, and our opponents can see that our advocacy can in fact solve the numerous harms of capitalism that we have directly outlined throughout our entire case. Insofar as that's true, they concede all solvency, which means we have every single reason here to vote for us. Give us a relevant ballot once again to endorse a Marxist flavor theory of value, as our opponents simply drop our entire case. And even if you look at post-fiat, once again, they're still subject to terminal policy failure, so every single thing here is weighted against them. For that reason, I strongly urge a neg ballot.
So I'm just going to be going over voting issues or reasons and like impact framing and reasons why you should vote. So starting time now. So the first thing that we're going to look at is all the pre-PI impacts in today's round, and we're going to be explaining why the EPA team wins on these pre-PI impacts. So first they bring up their hey bad shall, but like my partner already addressed, a critique is nothing more than a different type of argument, and it's literally just DAs, impacts, links, and a counterplan. So I don't really see what the problem is here. They're saying that the language that we use is too difficult for them to understand. First of all, like my partner said, they seem like very intelligent people. Second of all, there's no bright line. How do we know what words you do know and don't know? We're using English, that is a language that both of us understand, so it's inherently going to be fair. I apologize if you don't understand this, but there's, like I said, there's no bright line. Next, all the impacts about fairness and education, they don't make this an a priori issue, so even then you're going to be voting for that along with everything else. Now, their second point about the entire spreading theory shelf, the reason you should vote, the reasons you should not vote for that is, first of all, like I said, they never established a bright line for what spreading is and what spreading isn't. So how do we know if we're spreading or not? They can just say that if I'm speaking like this, they can claim that I'm spreading because they never established what the bright line between spreading is. Don't let them come up with in their last speech and give you the bright line, so you shouldn't be voting on the spreading anyway. And furthermore, I slowed down, like, if you've seen actual policy debaters, they'll talk 100 times faster than me. Even when I was talking fast, I wasn't really talking that fast. And even when you ask me to slow down, I slowed down. So we don't really meet with this. But then if you look at the pre-PI impacts, you're actually going to see that they're hurting us in the pre-PI. What they're doing is that by attempting to suppress us, they're using this sort of ontological violence to go against us. So even if you buy any pre-PI impacts, you should buy that simply because they're using the capitalistic mindset to say that what we're doing is bad. My partner brought this up, and they're using that as a way to suppress us. Okay, that's going on to post-PI. So first, I'm going to go on to case. So first I'm going to go on to links. Sorry. So on links, they literally extended. On links they conceded to most of our links. They conceded to how reformism is bad and how it compromises. Thus, even their policy cannot be used, and even their policy hurts and it re-entrenches capitalism. They conceded to how action in space re-entrenches the mindset that space is another resource to be exploited by the capitalists, and thus they conceded to that too. They conceded to that to the point about how the United Nations is nothing more than a thing for the 5 superpowers to exert their hegemonic influence and in fact exert their capitalistic influence. They conceded to all of those links. So even if you don't buy my partner's responses to the first link, those other 3 links still ensure that they win. Now we're going to impacts. So they conceded to the impact about how capitalism fuels an imperial drive to find new sources of expansion, and this is really, really bad because we can see that imperialism is bad because it affects people in all ways of life. People in the developing world will be affected by this. That's billions of people. So what we can clearly see is that the magnitude of this is huge, and the probability of this is really huge simply because they conceded to this, so we can assume 100% probability. Our second impact about Kern's case, they also conceded to this completely, meaning all the post-PI impacts that they could possibly have are turned against them. So they conceded to this, meaning that you're weighing neg's impacts against nothing. So even if you believe neg is a wash, you should believe they're a wash and vote neg in case of wash. Now, our third impact about how capitalism creates a material inequality that exacerbates all forms of other oppression. Again, they conceded to this as well. So what we're going to be assuming is that there's a 100% probability that capitalism will exacerbate other forms of oppression, meaning sexism, racism, all those things that inherently dehumanize people will exist in the status quo. Will exist once you pass the affirmation use plan are an intrinsic part of capitalism. Then for our fourth impact about environment, they sort of respond to this, but they didn't really respond to the meat of our logic, which is that capitalism will forever give us profit and it will give a motive for these corporations to exploit the environment for their own good, and this will inevitably lead to no less than the death of the environment. And they conceded to the link chain about how this will lead to extinction not only of human life, but also of all life. Again, probability of this is 100% simply because they didn't address this. So you're literally weighing 3 or 4 different ways about how capitalism hurts billions of people, and you're weighing 1 impact about how capitalism will kill off every single form of life on this planet. Now they conceded to most of the chunk of our alt solvency. They conceded to about how even if the alternative doesn't directly solve, it gets rid of the epistemic blind spot that capitalism invokes, so all these impacts can be solved in the future, simply because we create this new radical sphere of discussion, allowing for new change to occur. They also conceded the point about how revolutionary theory is a priori question, and that how without revolutionary theory we can't really have this alt and we can't actually solve anything. They basically conceded to literally our entire alt, so that's what the real point you're going to be looking for, is that 1, our alt solves all the impacts, 2, their case has no real impacts at all because they're all turned against them. 3, all the impacts of the capitalism will occur on the ass side of the float and the neg solves. So for all those reasons, I urge the neg out. Thank you.
Okay, so for order, I'm just going to be going over voter issues, and I'll title them individually, why you should be voting affirmation over negation. With that, I will start my time now. I started today's round talking about space and why we should be going into space and enacting certain treaties. But this debate, unfortunately, was completely skewed, and we're no longer really talking about space. So most of my voter issues are going to be geared towards how this is incredibly uneducational, and that this debate, what could have become something really interesting. And personally, I liked my first Ask speech. I thought I raised some interesting questions, but unfortunately they weren't responded to. And actually, what was responded to was then dropped by the second speaker. And this really just proves this fundamental idea that they've destroyed the educationality of today's debate, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. But before I do, one of their critiques on our case was that we didn't title this an A priority issue. I just want it to be clear, and I'm sure you guys look at your flows, that my partner said that the educationality is the top priority of debate, and that is the most important thing. So really, if we went on this point of educationality, you can scratch out everything that they've written because the educational value of debate is the most important part. And that brings me to my first point on that, which is speed. So first of all, we didn't even think to ask them that we could yell clear or slow. This isn't something that's normally done in parliamentary debate, but even given that they told us that part of the way through one of their speeches, at some points when we asked them to be slow or be clear, they didn't. They just kept going faster, or they only slowed down for a fraction of a second and then continued at the rate which they were going before. Both their first and their second speakers did this. Additionally, they used jargon, and I'm sorry to have to use that word myself. Essentially, it's an advanced language that's really primarily used in policy debate. And as they brought up, spreading, which is speaking incredibly quickly, is something used in policy. This is parliamentary debate, and that's really why you should be believing this speed point, because in parliamentary debate...
This idea that there should be a dichotomy between parliamentary debate and policy debate, and things from policy debate shouldn't be in parliamentary debate, is an entirely new argument.
Okay, it's new to this speech. However, they only brought it up in their second speech, so I don't see how my partner could have brought it up if it wasn't touched upon before then. So therefore, in my Ask Voters, I'm allowed to touch upon any points that they did not bring up that in a way that my partner had a chance to respond to them. So I'm going to keep going with what I was saying, and we'll leave it up to the judges. So going on, you judges are obviously very high in debate. So you may understand this jargon and you're really fast speaking, but I think I speak for the majority of the room, even though we're all interested in parliamentary or any debate of some kind or another, we don't understand it when they're speaking incredibly quickly like that. And they just came up here and sort of ran this finicky thing where what's fast, what's slow. I think it's quite clear when you are spreading and you're speaking to the best of your capability, that's pretty fast. And that just destroys the educationality of today's debate. And that's another reason you should be voting in favor of the affirmation. It really prevents us from responding to a case in any way we can. And they came up here and sort of complained that we just dropped everything. My partner said in his beginning of his speech, he didn't want to drop anything, but he physically could not flow everything that they were saying, because we choose parliamentary debate, as we said, because it is a little bit more accessible. And that's what we aim at debate to be, accessible and educational. And now on to the second point of predictability. They really skewed our prep time. They made my first speech really not mean anything when it should have been the starting point to an incredible debate. And unfortunately, that's what happened here. My partner brought up, I could have gone and got a latte instead. There was other things that we could have been doing with this time, but instead, this debate has devolved into this really meta debate where we're not even debating anything that's really in the real world. And that's what's really important, that we really couldn't respond adequately to their case, and I apologize for that. But that really is not the burden of the affirmation here, because they really ran something that completely skewed prep time, and for that, again, that's abuse, and you should vote in favor of the affirmation. But on to the third point, which is really discussing the case at hand. They really dropped the response to our case. They did. They came up here and they tried to respond to it, and they just said it's non-solvent in the last 25 seconds of their speech. So my partner went up there and explained why it is solvent, and they realized they really couldn't respond. So they said, okay, let's just drop this and roll with the K. This proves that they came into this debate not at all attempting to respond to our arguments. They didn't obviously that this debate means nothing and we're not learning anything. And it's unfortunate that I have to come up here and spend so far 4 minutes almost complaining about what they've done to this debate, and that's really, truly unfortunate. But moving on from that, we can't learn from this topic at all. There was real education to be had here, and we don't gain any access to that because there was no back and forth, no one was learning, no new points were brought up, and again, that is the most important, that is the a priori, if they want me to use jargon, that is the most important issue in today's debate, and for that reason, especially, I urge an affirmation ballot. But moving even further than that, we're around primarily teenagers, some adults, and students in college who are curious about the world and curious about policy. So that's a lot of us why we're all interested in debate. We're curious to learn, and we can't learn if these arguments are run. If my opponents come up here expecting to run an argument that has nothing to do with the resolution we were given. And with the final 10 seconds I have on this, I just want to quickly respond to this critique. Essentially, they said we can't respond to this because capitalism is bad. But again, we said the United Nations isn't like the huge upholder of capitalism. They even had 2 countries who were communist in it. This was a very debatable topic, and they could have debated it without conceding that communism is the worst, without conceding that communism is great. So for this reason, but especially of that educationality, and that my opponents have utterly destroyed what could have been a very interesting debate, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
No, we can't.